Hello, guys. This is Sarah Kolata with the Morning Architecture Talk Tongue. Today I have Sherif Morad with me. He is actually a university professor at the University of Cairo, and he specializes in computational design. And today he joins me to talk a little bit about parametric design, teaching online, as well as how parametric design actually finds its way in countries of the Middle East, as well as Egypt, and a little bit about his research that he's doing on the intersection of vernacular design with parametric. Sherif, thank you so much for joining me today on this early talk.
Thank you, Sarah, for having me. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your position at the university, as well as your research to start with, so people know a little bit more about you?
Sure. I'm an associate professor currently at the Department of Architecture at the American University in Cairo, AUC for short, so that it becomes easier to talk about. And I've started working here since 2014. Before that, I got my PhD at Georgia Tech, Atlanta, Georgia. And my specialty started there with computational design and building information modeling and digital fabrication. I was working under Professor Chuck Eastman, who was the father of BIM. He just passed away last week. But he was very inspiring in terms of the topics that were dealt with. Were very inspiring in terms of how computational design can really kind of inform the industry, and how research can really inform both academia and industry, and how it's leading in that regard. And so his work was kind of, pioneering and inspiring in that regard. Before that, I was at Carnegie Mellon for a year or so for a Fulbright grant, and I was also working with computational design in the Computational Design Lab over there at Pittsburgh. Earlier than that, most of my undergrad education was in Egypt. I hadn't really gone into the kind of computational area till I started with my master's. It was more about virtual reality and education and architectural education, and how that mixed reality can kind of inform us in terms of teaching and the new modes of teaching. That was way back like in 2003 or 4 or something. But then I got interested into other topics and how those can kind of the whole design computing area, and was really fascinating for me. And also my work really lies at the intersection of design computing and design cognition. So it's not, and that was really interesting, because the way I dealt with it, during the PhD studies and all of that, was really about going into these very interesting research projects and dealing with the industry and dealing with different firms as well, and all of that. But at the same time, realizing that there is another angle to it, about design methods, and about how we perceive technology, how architects perceive kind of technology, and the methods and how they think and all of that. It's not only about hard coding or programming and that's it. There's another angle to it. So that's what actually drove me at that point. Okay, let's just leave this kind of I was overwhelmed a bit also with a lot of programming and computation, and I decided, okay, let's just have an interesting balance in between. So at the end of it, I ended with a qualitative study, actually, which is interesting twist as well. But what was really interesting is getting to see it from both kind of angles, in a way, looking at it from the perspective of qualitative studies, studying how designers think within computational media, within their practices, within firms, how they deal with new technologies, how that affects kind of how sociocultural aspects also affect that. So I had this kind of interesting mix between kind of knowing the know-how behind it, but also kind of, okay, I need to really observe this in action and see how it works, and kind of situate it within how we work. Because if it's not really beneficial to the human kind of aspect, at the end of the day, it would be kind of our own assumptions of this typical technology and this typical kind of user who's using the technology, and we need to understand more, who are these users, who are these they're not like aliens, they are us. So we need to understand how we think about it and how we perceive it and how we make benefit of it, what are the challenges and limitations of it, and we can then become more informed and actually inform even those guys who are developing the tools and the software that we should be working with. So that was at that point I also went a bit into cognitive science and design cognition and dealing with both worlds a bit, and I'm still doing that in a way where my work lies at this intersection of really going into the very technical side, and at the same time, okay, let's just test this, how this works with us, how this works with the human side of things. So yeah, and then bringing it, having this perspective as well into teaching, I think was very beneficial. I'm also still collaborating with a lot of peers and a lot of professors back then from the US till now. We're doing some collaborative research. But also in the teaching, it affects how we also, because, as you were mentioning a while ago, in this part of the world, computation seems a bit, it's a fuzzy term in a way. And okay, so what are you doing? Are you doing CAD? Are you doing modeling? Are you doing rendering, visualization? So the perception actually is a bit different, and to instill the very notion of how computation can be really beneficial, you would have to have a bit of another edge, or how this can be really useful to us. Okay, so you would have to either for the students, because some of them, yeah, they are tech savvy and everything. Everybody's playing around with social media and technology and everything. But when it comes to actual work, students can freak out, working with very technical issues and rules and algorithms and, relationships and parameters. And, it becomes a bit, especially if you are a designer. So, okay, I'm not used to this. I'm used to the kind of thinking which implies that I'm either working in a manual mode, I'm sketching, which is fine. But and that brought us also to within the curricula that we're teaching in a computational design curricula to also tailor this a bit. So for example, in one of our courses, the digital design studio and workshop that I'm teaching, we made this twist intentionally so that we really make a build-up of what is an algorithm, for example. What are the steps and procedures that you need to do because if you jump in a tool right away, you become really overwhelmed. You just look around for commands and menus and you really freak out and you don't know what to do. So we made this, build up to it where we experiment physically first, and we understand, for example, through our experimentation and exploration with materials, for example, like physical materials and hands-on exploration. And then through that, we do maybe casting exercises and forming and fabric forming and stuff like that. And then we while doing that, we deduce, okay, we analyze, and in retrospect, we say, okay, what did we do? Did we, what are the variables that we actually came up with when we did this experiment physically? What are the rules and relationships that we can identify? And then it becomes a bit more streamlined and easier to conceive, at least, and understand. Okay, let's transfer these things into a computational medium, right? So, and also with sketches and everything. So we try to make this balance where this thing is not an alienated method. It's really based on very basic fundamental aspects of procedures and steps that just makes your mind a bit structured. So once you realize that, it becomes a bit more streamlined, a bit easier to work with, and then you come to make the students realize, okay, but this is really beneficial if you want to have a flexible medium, how you make things modifiable, easily parametrically driven, and so on, and how it becomes really it's still a design method at the end of the day, and it allows for creative design exploration and innovative and infinite solutions in a way, right? So once you get that as a student, I think, it opens up new kind of horizons for, okay, this is really beneficial, and I've tested it firsthand. I worked on the concepts physically, understand what I'm getting out of this. And then, I'm kind of, okay, I'm ready to go into the tool now. And I'm not really overwhelmed, with all those commands. I really know what to sort of dictate to the tool because I am in control. If you don't feel you're in control, you're really lost. So if you just go into that and tell everybody, okay, just tell me what to do. And once you feel that you know what you want to I know the method, I know the approach, and I just want to implement that in a way and allow the tool to be really a helper and a design thinking tool, working with algorithmic thinking, for example. So at that point, you become a bit more comfortable, and you can start working with that. But at the same time, in terms of if we leave the the teaching world for a bit and go into the wider kind of industry out there and the market and how people perceive also computational design, there also needs to be another kind of twist, how this is useful, how this is beneficial. Does it really, you would have to have this kind of selling point, so it would really, save energy. It would save you money, obviously, right? Selling it in a way that, okay, this, you can optimize your designs, you can value engineer them in an efficient way. You can work with methods that are related to, for example, space efficiency or something, or, so you would have to develop this in a much more, your pitch would be, you need to be different and a very explicit, because you need to kind of instill those ideas. At the same time, in research, for example, one of the interesting things that we've been doing also is, how can because if you look, how it's done, for example, in the UK or the US, there's a lot of, okay, it's about maybe what's really fancy now, the AI and all those fancy stuff, but in our part of the world, you really need to think of a problem and that you're offering a real, solution to something, rather than just exploring the newest and the most trendy, dimension. So what we've been working with is looking at, for example, how we can, although it's computational technological, but we're looking at problems that have a low tech, low cost kind of approach to them, and how this can be really beneficial in terms of research and in terms of getting, for example, a product or something out there, or a way of resolving things, or a way of looking at saving energy in a different way in the desert, hot, arid climates, for example. Looking at facade envelopes, for example, but using something that is, it looks technological, which adaptive and responsive screens, for example, for shading, or for as a solar screen, but also looking at available materials, for example. So if you look at wood, for example, how you can deal with bricks in a very simple way, that you make some parametrically driven extrusions and different brick patterns and brick bonds and stuff like that. This is you're playing with the majority of maybe informal housing in the whole country, for example. It's a mass kind of thing. So, but if you deal with something that it's very simple like that and affects the majority, and you get, for example, energy savings out of that, you get interesting shading quality, or interesting daylighting kind of penetration aspects that are beneficial, then you're really, and this method is really serving a cause, kind of. We're also looking at, playing with the hygroscopic properties of wood, how humidity and heat, for example, can affect the bending of wood. Maybe you can see that just above over there.
Oh, wow.
So looking at, different shading configurations, different patterns, parametric patterns of also facade envelopes, but that are really depending on also low cost, low tech aspects, and are not involving a lot of mechanical, very mechanistic, complex, expensive actuators and sensors and stuff like that, but they are still smart, you know, because you're depending on the sort of the embedded or inherent properties of that material, as opposed to kind of, you know, having like $1 million motor or something to do that. So you're looking at how, and it's really how it becomes a passive kind of system at the end of the day for cooling, for example, in our region. So it's, you know, it's kind of beneficial in that regard, because you're looking at how this kind of responsive reaction would, you know, twist and bend and go back to its initial position and move and so on. So it becomes, but it's all depending on natural conditions and natural environmental conditions, and a sort of a passive programmable actuation at the end of the day. So yes, it is computational in terms of like the methods that you're doing, but at the end of the day, it would seem like it's, you know, vernacular in a way, because you're looking at like originally, like in our kind of heritage, you're looking at, for example, the wood lattice, the Islamic and Arabic wood lattice, for example, and how that was used for, you know, ventilation aspects, for daylighting aspects, for privacy aspects, and so on, and how you can emulate that with a new understanding, you know, with the neo kind of vernacular kind of way with technology and computation. So that's fascinating for me, because you can look at these aspects in a very different way, and you still are kind of abiding by your own kind of cultural heritage and stuff that was originally in our, you know, kind of heritage. But you're utilizing it in a different way, and you're really capitalizing on technology and still satisfying your ego in a way, in terms of the methods that you're using. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you mentioned, you know, the application of it in vernacular and heritage projects, because I think that, I mean, I'm really passionate about this topic. You know, for me, architecture is about vernacular and optimization of something that already existed for generations. I think that there is a lot of wisdom already in the technology that was used anciently, even with, you know, basically material and like chemical engineering of materials, you know, when buildings are built out of earth, how did they optimize that earth to achieve stronger and better material capacity, especially like if it comes to like vernacular technologies. And I love this topic. And then this adds sort of like a new twist to it, where, you know, you can optimize the building. You can kind of really test the environment, especially the site where you're putting your building, and shading or lighting, and using all those parametric tools to actually optimize your design. So it's really the intersection of an old and new. And I think this is really sort of what personally brought me to digitalization and digital technology in architecture, as well as generally using internet for business in architecture and for communication and teaching, because I just think that there is an importance in preservation, but in order to truly preserve around the world, you need to spread the knowledge out there and somehow educate people, you know. And so I saw this positive influence of the internet there, and that's really what got me to explore topics of digitalization, and also having a practice which I was running in Guatemala and Mexico, mainly working with vernacular technologies. Like it kind of got me to realize the importance of actually spreading knowledge and communicating with others and building a network globally through the power of internet, and also teaching, actually, because teaching and creating courses or putting your knowledge out there, your research out there digitally, actually is a form of preservation in its own. And that's really fascinating to me. So kind of finding different walks of life and seeing how people utilize this internet and digital technology actually to either bring their research forward or their teaching, or it's all of this somehow leaves legacy, actually, and it contributes to the richness of architecture and architectural education. And, you know, before this this conversation, we actually talked a little bit about digital transformation. And I know that you're obviously responsible for putting together the curriculum at the university. And right now, I'm guessing all of the education happens online. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you manage that. I know that obviously within the faculty, probably the professors as well as students are already very computer savvy, so that must help. But I'm curious to know about like project delivery and also the focus of projects right now in this time, as well as like how do you find the transition alone from analog to digital experience of teaching and knowledge sharing?
Yeah. Well, I get, it has been tough in a way. It was a tough transition. Not that we're not prepared. I mean, it's here at the university is one of the prominent universities that was kind of ready for the transition in a way. It only took like a week or two within the February, March, spikes and everything to kind of really transition easily. Because we already kind of have infrastructure for digital platforms and virtual kind of online settings. So that transition in a way was, I think, kind of smooth in a way, and also at the same time there was a lot of monitoring and observation of the reactions of everybody, of a very kind of in-depth follow-up of students and faculty, and getting impressions from everybody about the transition and how they feel about it, how stressed they are, how it's easier to. This is of course university wide, but when you get into architecture, it's a bit different. Because well, the students are tech savvy, and they would I would personally have assumed, okay, this is much easier. You're on Facebook and Twitter all the time, so you might as well add Zoom to that and just go ahead with it and work. But amazingly, of course, there is of course a component that relates to the physical face-to-face interaction, and how you get your kind of that sort of feedback and that sort of interactive kind of method of teaching and learning and instruction. The university actually had a lot of effort in terms of trying to streamline that, trying to put a lot of material and resources, making everything available in terms of how you can do like pre-recorded videos, how you can do these sessions, how you can make things interactive, how you can do the blended and flipped modes and stuff like that. And that was kind of it came a bit handy at the very beginning. It was kind of new to all of us, but I found it personally kind of it made us learn a lot. Like these 6 to 9 months have been really intense, but at the same time we have really gone far into learning a lot about in retrospect, okay, what have we been doing like years and years ago. We could have made things a bit easier in terms of flipped modes. You hear a lot about them, but you're not forced to do them unless you really have a crisis or a pandemic. So it was there. It's not something like this was really new, but it was there for several years. But it's interesting how crises like this can kind of force you or allow you in a way to really discover the affordances and what they mean in terms of instruction and education. So it was personally kind of, it wasn't challenging technically. I mean, all of us are, students and faculty are, kind of equipped to do that, but it was just about, how we observe things and how we see the progress going. And ironically, interestingly enough, I mean, I'm looking at the student process and outcomes in relation to previous semesters and previous years. I've been seeing fascinating work. It's much better than what it used to be, and we tell students that all the time. I mean, it's you're more focused. You're in a way. If we look at the advantages, kind of, you're more focused. You're staying at home. You're kind of managing your time a bit more efficiently. You're not losing a lot of time in traffic, which can take like half a day in Cairo. You're managing your time very efficiently between courses and between running your assignments and projects and everything. So the time span is kind of wider in a way. The duration, the availability of time is fine. The instruction and feedback in a way, although you miss the physical interaction, but in a way forcing yourself to be like on the spot and having these like sessions and stuff like that. makes you a bit, I mean, it's really known when you're not there, like when you're not available or when you're not on Zoom, for example. So, okay, we know that you're not there. We kind of, we schedule sessions. We have a lot of more office hour online sessions. We have a lot of feedback. We have extended time. We're 24/7 on Zoom almost. But at the end of the day, actually just looking at the output and the process and the reflections of the students as well. I've been seeing very, very interesting work coming out in this duration, primarily, I think, because of this kind of, effectiveness and efficiency of time use and management, and it's all kind of unconsciously, built up and escalated, and your adrenaline is going up, and you're spending more and more time unconsciously, and you're really focused because you probably don't have anything else to do. But at the same time, it comes, I think, at the expense of kind of the stress and anxiety that can come out of that for for the students and maybe for the faculty as well. So having to do this online all the time and spend hours and hours, it's really can damage us kind of mentally in a way. So it can affect you in this way. So but I'm seeing it getting us, again, going back to the first point, it's making us kind of learn a lot about how can we use our time more effectively. We've been wasting obviously a lot of time in as you're saying, like lecturing for 2-3 hours, and then okay, so after that, I don't really have any more energy for, studio, for example, and stuff like that. So if you kind of develop these hybrids and these flip modes, and you kind of have these, okay, guys, if you want to just listen to something, listen to this pre-recorded video or look at this or that, resources are becoming into this online mode. So what's really, what are we really capturing that can be done online and is actually more effective online? Not only that you can just do it, but it's really more effective if you do that, and really expand the time span of how we can spend that together in a more live interaction session and more intellectual, interactive feedback and discussion, right? So more time for hands-on work, more time for experimentation, for exploration, for creativity, rather than, spending just an hour or more just talking about stuff. And then, of course, every now and then you need to have like material out there that needs also some type of live interaction, like as a talk or a lecture, but you can kind of incorporate that as well with the hands-on work and with the kind of studio instruction in a way. So I guess it redefines in a way how we even think of the credits or units, in terms of, credit hours. And how efficient they are. And if you say like, okay, I have so-and-so contact hours and credit hours, I think it's kind of being redefined now, because you're thinking of, okay, what's the real, you're making a lot more benefit out of the same kind of amount of time in a way. So it has been, it has its ups and downs, and we're continuously kind of reflecting on this issue with the students and how they feel about it, and how they think of the whole process, and how they're gaining or how they're having issues or problems with it. But I guess all in all, everybody's kind of a bit worn out from the whole online experience itself, and they kind of, okay, I just want to go out in the streets, just want to go out to campus and campus life and stuff like that. And of course, that has its merits and advantages. But I'm also coming to the realization of we really cannot go back to the same normal with the same kind of physical presence, with the same kind of logic of how we do, how we teach studio, how we kind of work together, how we interact with each other. It has to change, and it has to be more efficient and effective and optimized, as you're saying. And I think it has taken a lot of time, a lot of decades for architectural education has been a bit stagnant in terms of catching up with how technology would affect it and impact it in a positive way. I think, now is the opportunity to kind of redefine things and work with, these different modes of learning and interaction, and how we can, bring ourselves up to speed with that.
Absolutely. I really agree with you. And, for me, what's fascinating in it is that computational tools, they always optimize what we do already, in design, in the delivery, in the mode of learning, as well as in business, and I think something that I got really kind of hooked on is the idea of how you can scale and optimize basically the way you work already. So we see it, for example, with parametric tools and also computational design, how easier life became when we started to use these tools. And I think that architects and as well as students are still, because we are so traditional and traditionally minded, and sometimes it takes a while for us to transition into new ways of doing things. Even when you look at computational design, like certain tools like AutoCAD have been accepted and somehow integrated into our workload faster. But then if it comes to, like, for example, parametric design, tools such as Grasshopper and all these fancy things, there's been years of debates back and forth, like, do we even need it? Is it taking away from the designer? And and then after so many years, obviously, of course, it found itself its way somehow to mainstream architecture practices, and a lot of architects are using parametric optimization because of course it just saves time, it's easier, and it also exposes problems that maybe sometimes the human mind won't catch. Like, for example, if you are trying to check the optimization, or for example the position of a building within the urban scale and how the shade and the light works with this and things like that, it just helps you to see certain things that maybe you wouldn't be able to guess happen. So this is amazing. And then when you think about internet and the tools that we have for delivery, I'm thinking now, like, that even though it's been a really hard couple of months for professors and faculties to adapt into digital learning, I think that one of the benefits that come out of it is for people to realize how much time they can save once they start recording some of the lectures that they over and over again repeat for years, and actually also the delivery of this lecture can be optimized by understanding, okay, I should also add maybe this slide there, or maybe send people to a certain workbook or whatever. And so that way you create one but really good training. And I think that it saves somehow like mental capacity and our ability to focus and deliver better high quality work. And then you're always going to have that kind of interactive live element to teaching. And I think that once somehow most of it is automated, and then the professors know and the students know when is the time to interact in real life, somehow it's like people can take more out of that time. There's more quality that can be given because like the mind is fresh somehow, but also there's more that can be taken out of it. And I think it's just an incredible time we live in, that we somehow have been forced to open up to more and more tools as architects. And it definitely has its also its influence on business, because that element of scalability and automation as well applies to that. So it's really fascinating. And I think that even though it's all together as architects, I think somehow we're slow to move into these kind of technologies. It is a process that we entered, and it's somehow spreading now to almost every single part of our life and delivery. And it's just fascinating, and more tools are appearing as well. There's people that are developing better tools for financial management of projects, and and team management and distribution of budgets, and I mean, seriously, whatever you can think of, every part of architectural planning, delivery, education, design, all of it gets automated slowly, and it's fascinating. And I think, of course, individually we can choose what we want to use, but slowly but surely, I think more and more of those elements are going to find their way into our everyday life. Knowing how technology spreads, it's just something that you can't stop.
Yeah, I think one of the things, going back to one of the early points we've been discussing, is that as you mentioned, the kind of the mainstream integration, of technology. I think if we're, and how slow we are, in terms of architects and architecture real, sometimes it's, if you want to point fingers, or blame anybody, I think that the blame can somehow be on how those software tools and those technologies are adapting to us, and not the other way around. So you talked about Grasshopper and automated kind of tools and so on, but there is something about, it's a notion worldwide. So everybody, when they go into these kind of tools, they are overwhelmed, and there is something about it that there's something that needs to happen, to make this a bit easier. So whether it's like how to make it streamlined to be more intuitive, for example, how to make it more user friendly, how to make it like not so complex in establishing those relations and rules and stuff like that, maybe a bit more user interactive and user friendly, maybe being more immersed into the tool rather than just doing it like with a desktop and a screen. So it's sometimes it's really about how developers of technologies would actually, and that's why I was telling you at the beginning, I had to kind of study that, because I really wanted to know how people at the other end perceive it, because if they're still struggling with it, then we have a problem. We as technology developers who are architects and have the benefit of knowing both architecture and technology would be to blame in that part, because we have to develop something more catering for those users again. So again, the idea of, for example, also in when we talk about education, for example, so is it only about the notion of having those just recorded sessions or stuff like that? Is it really going to make it easier, or by time when this becomes mainstream as well, maybe it's just not efficient anymore or not beneficial? Maybe it's not as appealing as it is like now. So is it more about investing in like virtual reality systems and technologies, and how you become more kind of immersed into that experience, how you can make concepts more easier to kind of observe and visualize in a way, and not only about the content delivery, but about the actual principles and concepts you want to deliver. So making it kind of available in a more three-dimensional kind of virtual environment, or something that makes it easier to capture and easier to visualize, and it would actually get you to transition to a different mode of thinking and operation, and make you even more innovative, because you actually understand things maybe spatially or three-dimensionally. So kind of extending that term online to include not only the online platform of communication, but also design thinking platforms, in our case, because the whole world is talking about online, but for us as architects, online can mean a lot of things, and you can integrate a lot of virtual environments, artificial intelligence, machine learning, stuff like that, and all of this becomes very interesting to work with when you're really focused on, as an objective, you're focused on design thinking, for example, and not about streamlining the delivery of the content, right? Because that just makes it it's kind of similar to when CAD was introduced as a drafting tool at the beginning, not as a design thinking medium, right? So as opposed to sketching and manual drawing, you're just drawing it on a computer, right? So that didn't like really revolutionize at all, but it just made it like on a different medium. And then people started to think, okay, well, can we really use this thing to think rather than just execute? So it's kind of the same logic in a way, where this online mode can force us to think about, like online design thinking rather than, just online platforms for communication. So perceiving it as just a communication tool or dimension, I think it's a bit, it would be a bit, undermining the value of how we can start utilizing all the stuff that we've been researching and looking at for 20-25 years, actually, VR and stuff like that, and expert systems and AI and whatever we have there, and then just reducing and diluting that to only kind of working on Zoom, That's really like, it's really undermining things. So it cannot be, I understand it cannot be like mainstream at some point, because it's also a lot of resources and infrastructure. But for architectural education to get something out of this, we really have to invest in something a bit more, it would have to stretch the boundaries a bit in terms of how it thinks of, this kind of mode, and how, what can we learn from it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. And I think it comes with time, really. Like it all unfolds with time. People learn more and more about how to also combine those things, like working on computers, and then also communicating your work with others, sharing files. I mean, it's really just so many different elements to it. So it's fascinating. Thank you so much, Sherif, for your time. I mean, this was just such an interesting talk. Thank you for sharing topics on your research, and also your view at computational design, parametrics. So do you want to share maybe something more about your research and where people can find some of the work that you do online?
Yeah, sure. I guess on my webpage at AUC, there's a lot of links to to my profile and CV and main publications over there, the AUC webpage, and also on LinkedIn, of course. Most of the stuff that I'm doing, and ResearchGate as well has a lot of the publications and so on, and maybe Scopus and Google Scholar found a lot of other publications as well. And also there's another kind of practice that we're doing, professionally speaking. We're also dealing with, we're doing architecture projects, but we're also developing technology solutions for, facility and property management. That's part of also, how we're kind of dealing with the smart building management solution idea within our context. So that's also another, challenge. But that's our, kind of private business. I think also people can find a link to that on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, that's mostly it. And thanks a lot for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Pleasure. Also, I will post your LinkedIn in all the lives and all the links that we just broadcasted, so people can also add you there and check up on the work, the private work, the research work, and the university academic work. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening, for tuning in with us. Thank you, Sherif, for joining me today. It's really early morning, but it's a good way to kickstart the day. So
yeah,
thanks for this. Yeah, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.